The best laid plans of mice and men needs to probably apply here. We know there's just something about humanity and plagues, whether we are dealing with the one at that current point in time, or just attempting to avoid one, or maybe in some instances we are completely stupid and make up our own plague. Cough cough, current era. It just seems to be something that fundamentally worries our brain cases and meat suits, and obviously for good reason. Nobody is trying to check out early for the most part. However, going back to my original point, sometimes we as a species have great intentions concerning things that we build and the counters that we produce, but the reality is, maybe the devil you know is sometimes better. In New York City, a hell on earth if you will, they will be inundated with natural New Yorkers who I couldn't tell the difference between those concerning these monsters and the average person in the subway. But then again, this was 90s New York, so maybe things were different. Alright, so enough dunking on like New York and everything. A mystery illness would break out, forcing the hand of the powers that be to create a countermeasure in order to address the vectors for this illness known as Strickler's disease, the cockroaches. Upon doing so, those who originally designed the counter would begin to find out that it wasn't so easy peasy lemon squeezy as they thought. In fact, it was difficult lemon grip of the gods. So in today's episode, we will go over the actual disease that was afflicting the children, because I actually was a microbiologist scientist working for similar things, so that is absolutely my jam. I'll probably end up actually returning to that someday, probably once my YouTube career concludes. Anyhow, we will also talk about the very obvious monster in this movie and why it chose the form it did. Alright, let's get to it. So pretty much for all those new here, I'm going to say this. Mimic 1 and 2 were pretty good. Mimic 3 made me feel weird, as the dude is just standing in his room taking pictures of other people's apartments and other people in their apartments. Pretty sure that's illegal, bro, but there will be a timestamp up on screen to bypass the summaries. I haven't fully decided if I wanted to cover the entire trilogy as of yet, but definitely the first two movies, and maybe like a massive quick wrap up of the third, because honestly, it was kind of just a complete dumpster fire. But then again, a dumpster fire would actually be more interesting to watch. If you like Mimic 3, I feel bad for you, son. I got two other mimics, and the third one just isn't fun, like at all. For all others, let's talk about how the only place a giant bloodthirsty man-eating bug could hide would actually just be in the Northeast, because nobody actually really acknowledges anyone else up there. It's kind of cool, but also bizarre, because we definitely don't do that in the South. We start off our story in snowy New York with a bunch of radio channels talking about a new form of virus that has been taking to the streets and dropping kids left, right, and center. Known as Strickler's disease, it spreads amongst children, indicating high infectivity, but what's worse is its pathogenicity. Now, I could say virulence because it's really kind of interchangeable, but that's just way too popular of a word right now. Almost all children who catch it will be dropping within a week. The others who might survive will be in leg braces for the rest of their lives if they're lucky, and even then it's suggested that their lifespan will be shorter than average. As we get a look at the fence covered in memorials, it's clear that things aren't going well. In a makeshift sick room, adults appear to be completely immune to the disease, and kids appear to be struggling hardcore. Entering a sewer, it becomes clear who the vector for this disease is. These freaking cockroaches, which are everywhere. As Dr. Susan Tyler enters the sewer, she drops humanity's ultimate answer to them. A hybrid cockroach mixed with mantis DNA, amongst other things, which we will come to find out will be known as the Judas breed. Setting down the containers to indicate that these roaches were definitely harmed in the making of this movie, once entering and leaving their holding pen, they immediately begin releasing a liquid. The aim of this liquid is to speed up the metabolism of the roaches and thus make their calorie intake more demanding, which in turn will cause them to begin starving. Seeing this success upon re-entering the sewer later, roaches have dropped readily, so everyone now celebrates because they did it. 6 months later, as the CDC meets with a bunch of reporters, Susan declares that the outbreak is over and it has been conquered. That'll be really nice to hear one day, am I right? During this time, Dr. Peter Mann, Dr. Mann, what a name for a dude, ends up bagging Dr. Susan Tyler to no doubt make a massively nerdy child in the future, because they found love in a disease-ridden place. Also, I'm really not nailing it with these music references today. The coffee was just really good this morning. Jumping ahead to 3 years later, we see a man hauling it out of a church as someone breaks down a door. He yeets off the side and lands on a painting platform before seeing something up above him that looks like a man. He ends up falling and I guess turning his brain into soup, but in a window, an autistic child watches the creature drag him away as he mimics on spoons the noises that it makes. Also, it's literally raining all the time in these movies. I'm gonna complain about this. Like, why is it always raining in New York? Like every single day. How is New York not underwater at this point? As Peter talks to Susan, they get a call on their pager. Ooh, that's a throwback. The two are attempting to make some babies now, and Peter tells her that he's got ice in his underwear. Sounds painful, but he gets a call to go out to a site where there's some human Man, traffic is bad today, and I have to say it that way, but let's just, say they're being held. Called the CDC to investigate, and get this guy's name is Josh, but the original actor's name is also Josh, which must have made filming way better. Anyways, they go in there with very little PPE, even suspecting an outbreak of respiratory diseases, and they even say that the actual bacteria is airborne. Like, what even is this investigation? Anyways, Peter keeps touching his glasses with his gloves on that he literally just touched other contaminated areas of the building. Highly intelligent. So they get to the basement of this building, and they found where the traffic is as one woman screams about a dark angel with wings taking people. They think that she's really just making stuff up, but then they find what appears to be turds hanging from the ceiling. Also very nice. So now the bug lady, according to the kid with huge teeth, I remember that phase, approaches her to sell some bugs. We get a breakdown on what the colony does. Spoiler, it eats other bugs and then brings them down to a pantry, but Susan agrees to buy the bugs from the kid, saying it's better that they are selling that than other stuff. They also mention how they found a weird bug in the subway. As the wind blows and they go to shut the window, we see the average New Yorker is just standing outside the window. Susan is currently working on a project to restore the roach population, but while she talks about it, she puts her hand into the mystery box, knowing that there's just some random bug in there. No thanks. Insects really bug me. Meanwhile, the dynamic duo investigation team found another turd in the basement and figured out that it actually had buttons in it. As Susan drags out the mystery bug, she touches it and it bites her. Big surprise. So she stabs it with a pin as it lets out its juices, indicating that it is a Judas breed. Also, average New Yorker has broken in, grabs his baby as he's upsetty that she did that, and Susan then confirms genetically that it is in fact the Judas breed. So average New Yorker, you know what, I'm gonna call him Annie because average New Yorker, A-N-Y, although I guess the autistic child does call him Funny Shoes. Anyways, Annie then breaks into the church as it's his home base. Peter goes into a right proper domestic with Susan over her going back to work. She says that she needs to get back, as even though the Judas breed was designed to unalive itself within one generation, the one she examined today was a baby, meaning life finds a way, as said by another famous doctor. So they're breeding down there as bugs do. In the land of subs, Manny attempts to teach his kid how to clean shoes, but it does not appear to be going too well. As Peter, Man, and Susan find the kids and talk to them from earlier, they eventually get the door open to a side room and try to find out where these bugs actually came from. Searching the room, Susan spills a bunch of marbles on the floor under a locker, as clearly there's a big hole in there. Also, a big bug monster. Susan puts her hand down in a creepy hidey hole and almost gets it bitten off for a $3 flashlight before getting busted by the cops, or the cop. The cop tells them to get lost as Susan then walks off to go talk to a child. He's good at mimicking the sounds that he hears, which she finds rather interesting. Peter says he's going to come back with way more than just permits. Meanwhile, the kids are walking alone in the subway somehow. Where was the cop from earlier? And also, they got taken off by that one woman who's just sort of like a side character. I don't know. As the kids are walking along, they find that those bugs before are all over the place, and then they step in a goo pile. They eventually find an egg sac, which if you didn't know, this movie is not afraid of unaliving children. As they go to cut the egg open, bug monster extraordinaire ends the flashlight friend first as the other gets stuck in barbed wire. Basically, they both get mega impaled. Ouchies. So Susan meets with Dr. Gates at this point, to which he says that he doesn't condone what she did because of the roaches. Look, all I'm saying is I would wipe out any and all species, be it multicellular or single cell, to stop it from wrecking a bunch of kids of our species, because humanity's always going to be number one. But her tests said that they showed that they should have literally ended after 120 days, to which Gates responds, yes, but you let them out. Okay, so does that change the genetic profile just because she let them out to breathe different air? The real issue is not enough tests were conducted to understand what would actually happen, as it was all rushed. As Chewie looks outside his window later, he hears the bug show making its click-clacking in the church. Not understanding what a bad idea this is, he enters the church. Eventually we see Mr. Funny Shoes hanging out in the corner as he uses his spoons to communicate with it. As he does, another comes over to him, so it seems pretty bad, but it appears as though his spoons are basically what spares him in this moment. As, again, these things are definitely not afraid of unaliving tiny adults. Okay, so now we actually enter the real hellscape, New Jersey. I'm not even sure what is up with this sewage water treatment plant, but this job looks terrible. So one of the filters actually ends up getting clogged, and as the guy goes to free it, he thinks that it's a tiny adult. The next morning, Peter's woken up by a phone call telling him that he needs to get Susan on the phone. Meanwhile, Susan is taking a pregnancy test. They wait the 5 minutes and it comes back negative. I mean, this is kind of a crappy test though, because later it shows up as yes, she is pregnant. But back in New Jersey, they open up the thing and found that it's actually just a larger Judas priest bug. As Manny talks to his son, he realizes that he's not there, so that's not good. But the dream team gets the lockers moved as they tell a cop he's been requested to go back there with them. 3 weeks from retirement. Manny tells the cops and says that they have to wait 48 hours before they can report a kid missing, which is actually a lie. As soon as you think anybody's missing, especially if they're younger, you could mobilize the cops pretty much immediately. Manny checks the church and finds evidence he was there before descending into the underground area. Also, how did his shirt get so wet so fast? I get that it's raining, but like he's completely soaked by the time he walks out of his apartment. Anyhow, in the old subway tunnel, they begin their bug-filled adventure. Peter calls Susan, but right before he can use his 90s cell phone to tell her she's pregnant, he loses signal. Complete classic. Manny is now moving through the sewers and following what he thinks is the spoon noise. Meanwhile, Dr. Gates has been brought the bug from the sewage plant. As he performs an autopsy, he finds this is a soldier cast bug and that it has organs. Down the tunnels, the gruesome threesome find a bunch of turds on the wall. As Susan has a realization about these bugs, folding a picture over, she connects it to show that it almost has a human face. So here's the most unbelievable part. The subway is completely full of people. Seeing a shadow, she goes to ask it the time before realizing it's Mothman. As she runs, everyone's just gone. In a subway in New York during the day. What? Anyways, she gets grabbed by this thing and has a really bad time. Now the squad has reached the armory station. The cop stomps one of the Judas bugs, which weakens the old structure, and then they fall down and don't break anything. I mean, a rolled ankle at least would probably be the result. As Peter tries to climb, they realize that they need Josh to go back and get help. Susan is now in the pantry of the colony, which ain't good. Also, people are like right above her and nobody can hear her yelling, but the bug monsters can. Also, it's raining again. It's like London with this climate, good lord. But the bugs are now after her. As she sprints out, she finds a grate and then closes it. The bugs can't figure out how to really open it, so it just sort of nopes out of there, but she's stuck now. As our boy Joshy Josh minus the Funky Bunch makes his way out, he ends up finding eggs and also finds something is watching him. Attempting to leave, the thing gives chase after he accidentally knocks over a crate. Right on the cusp of escaping, which probably not because that thing would have easily crawled up there, it clearly kind of gets him through the chest even though it only shows that his calves were stabbed, and then it drags him back to his doom, so no help is coming from him. Back at Armory Station, the cop starts singing, definitely not the vibe, my dude. Also, I just want to point out something which is hilarious. Peter needs glasses, right? Well, his left lens is broken, so he pops it out. Then when he goes to read the paper, he closes his right eye, which that one still has the lens, so that he's reading with his left. So basically confirmed, Peter wears glasses because he thinks it makes him look smarter. Peter suggests that they rewire the lights to get them on, but they finish up with their lover's quarrel as they hear something, and it turns out to be Manny. Manny had found Susan earlier and says that she needs help, and as they all go to pull her up, they retreat back to the subway as the cop is made a believer in the bug problem. As he unloads a ton of rounds, more than what I can assume would be in that force multiplier, it breaks itself in half before commencing an attack again and slicing open the cop's leg as he takes it out for good. Manny closes all the doors at this point and they address the wound. Susan then looks at the creature and finds out that the bug has lungs. So this is where the $1 million idea comes into play. They increased its metabolism, which means it was able to overcome the gene that it was supposed to edit, which doesn't make a lot of sense because it would need to reproduce those 40,000 generations to mean anything. But somehow it did overcome that and genetic mutations rose quite quickly. It then took on the form of its only natural predator, which is humans, which is also a little bit of a dumb idea because humans were not hunting these things by any stretch of the imagination. But don't worry about that because it's a movie and it doesn't have to make 100% sense. So as they ignore their own advice and begin yelling at one another again, the attack on the train begins. The creatures can smell the blood of man. Susan pulls out a bunch of bug guts and tells them to rub the windows covering the scent. They now devise a really dumb idea. Use the subway train to escape. I mean, it sounds like a good idea, but I don't know. It could attract them because of noise, so anyways, they don't know if it's gonna work or not, but hey, let's find out. Peter says that he will go get the car working and Manny needs to find Chewie, so they armor up in bug gut juice. As they exit, Peter is the first to find a bug man, but it passes him with little issue as he smells like a bug. Manny though, not so much. Finding Chewie, he freaks out a little and then starts sweating. Susan finds that the tunnels lead out of the city and that these creatures are going to migrate out and start colonies everywhere. She devises that they need to find the male that's hanging out with Chewie and Manny. So Manny gets got. Bummer. The cop says that it's taking too long and Susan bug juices up and then heads out. Peter gets the subway car going with his glasses, pretty Chad-like, but Peter now finds an elevator to the surface, or actually it's a dumbwaiter. The cop pushes the subway car to go, but an extinguisher then hits him in his wound, making him bleed more. Peter questions where his wife went and finds her in a room. The cop bleeds all over the place, which starts attracting the bugs. He ends up trying to like hoof it out of there before getting got, but then one finds him anyways and he gets got. Loading Chewie into the elevator, Peter sends them up as the male descends upon them. Peter makes a breakthrough in the tunnel as the male somehow figures out that the cable is what's holding up the elevator. Peter shuts a metal door and is surrounded by gas lines. As he goes through and breaks them, Susan and Chewie escape the elevator. Peter realizes that this is the nest and this is his chance, so again, breaks a ton of gas lines and attempt to blow them up concussive force. However, his lighter doesn't work when he needs it to because it's a piece of junk, so grabbing the tool, he attempts to make a spark and is eventually successful, Lucky for him because the bugs literally just stood around him for like literally a solid 10 seconds while he did this. But as the concussive force ignites, he then falls into the water below. I'm not sure that would matter to be real with you, but every sewer and subway line is engulfed in flames. As Susan looks around for Chewie, she finds that the male is approaching him. Getting its attention with her blood, it comes to her as a subway train comes down the line. This hits the male bug, taking it out and destroying it entirely like a bug on the windshield on a car on the highway. As Chewie and Susan go up to the surface, a man stands in the subway. A Peter man. He has survived despite being at the literal center of a blast. I don't get how his trajectory went, but oh well. Also, why he's standing there like a total weirdo is just beyond me. So I guess they also adopt Chewie at this point, unless they just stick him in an orphanage, which, well, that sucks. And now all's well that ends well. Or does it? Because Mimic 2 has entered the game. So Mimic 2, what are the odds that we would have 2 bug ladies? Well, considering this movie is about bugs, I suppose pretty good. And today's theme is going to be, why is every single male in this movie god awful? It's like a caricature. Oh wait, New York. Oh yeah. We head back down into the subway with a man surprised by a subway train using the subway. As he walks along, he begins to see something is stalking him. Heading to the surface, oh look, more rain. Running down the road, the man thing stands in front of him as he's clearly understanding, well, that thing's probably not good. And as the creature gives chase, it catches up with him and slices him before a taxi hits him full force. And as they find his meat suit, he appears to be missing his faceplate. As the creature heads down some tunnels, it leads right under a school, and we meet Bug Lady. A little bit quirky, as you will come to find out, she drops a ton of exposition on us. Basically, the queen of this colony is gone despite males trying to build it. Eventually, this will lead to the end of their colony as a result. The last soldier will go on, which is basically what we just saw. She gives them a report due tomorrow, oof, and they all go outside to play in the rain. Bugman watches, but nobody notices him, like, he's standing right there. But back in the Bug Lady's apartment, there are a lot of bugs. She's having nightmares about Mothman as her window opens and lets in the monsoon. The next day, as a boy named Sal stands up in front of class and talks about how much it sucks to be a bug because you're all alone, and how he wants to hurt his family if they're happy. I don't know why he added that. Alex gets the idea that maybe this kid is completely on his own. Just maybe. So we meet Jerry from Parks and Rec, and then we meet Nikki, who is shooting his shot because everyone had that one teacher in high school. Spanish 1 class. Man, it was a time and a half. But she declines his advances because she'd rather not end up in jail and really isn't interested. Also, probably a solid move on her part. Also, I'm required by law to say Spanish 1, nothing happened. Back at home, we start to see Alex really knows how to pick him. Jason shows up after one date with flowers to hit on her. She calls him a stalker, so he does the normal thing and completely unhinges her door like a complete psycho and throws flowers in the house. I guess he's probably not gonna get that second date. But then she takes a picture of her own face and posts it on the bad date wall amongst all others, assumedly because all she dates are complete psychos. This seems a little weird in itself, and the way she writes the N in Jason is just completely wrong. So here we go again with the rain. As Alex runs into Bugman and Jason has already gotten got, she's heading out on a date and is putting away that crab like you would not believe. But then again, that's how I eat crab too. She's talking about riveting conversation about how termites impale their mates when they're, getting frisky. And as this dude devolves into an ooga dooga brain, he asks her to come out for a nightcap, but she declines. As he turns around, he gets punched. Looking around, he doesn't see anything, but looking up, he spots the Bugman. He gets dragged up a building and towards a horrible fate at this point. It would appear that the bug has the hots for Alex. Why would it have the hots for a human? I don't know, but maybe play Mass Effect 2 and that'll tell you everything you need to know. Back in a dark alleyway, which seems stupid to walk down, Alex is confronted by a detective as her window blows open for like the 8th time that week. Lock it. At this point, Mr. Bugman comes to her window, but lacks the boombox. As the detective goes to leave, he walks down the alleyway where he finds a shadow before he gets some blood splatter on his face. Jason's body comes crashing down as Alex is brought in for questioning. Pro tip, always have a lawyer present. Not because you're guilty, but because it's your right as an American. Alex goes home and then has a good cry over it. The next day, as they discuss what they should do with Alex at the station, the detective asks the other guy to hand him a desk. He protests, to which Klasky responds that if he can't hand him that desk, how did a 112-pound woman throw a 200-pound man up into the air over those wires? It really didn't make any sense. Meanwhile, back at work, the principal is basically firing Alex because of her association with faces being eaten. At this point, Sal goes to check on his cat. I guess it's his cat, and he just saw that thing in there, so bruh. As Jerry eats some pizza later that night and then heads back to clean the school, I guess. But it doesn't matter because actually he's being hunted because he had one conversation with Alex. It's becoming more apparent at this point. Sal also has nowhere else to go, by the way, so as Jerry, which, alright, his name is Lou in the movie, but I watched a lot of Parks and Rec, so it's Jerry, walks along, he ends up trying to do a pull-up up before the bed bugs bite and get him as a result. As Klasky goes back to Alex's house, we see some egregious violation of rights. Klasky enters Alex's home and then finds the bad date wall. So it looks pretty bad without context, though it's not much better with context. As he exits, the Department of Defense arrives. Does anyone actually have a warrant? Probably not. They all have black lights for some reason and are finding hits all over. Also, don't take a black light to a hotel, as bugmen tend to live there. As Alex and Sal go to leave, the hallway has been completely blocked. Alex calls out for Lou, but instead Maury shows up asking what is going on with the barrier. Maury then says that he will mess with it and get them out. He's been working out and he's 40% stronger, and then goes on to say he's like a spider monkey in bed. Again, complete caricature, but it doesn't matter because Bugman is 50% stronger and Shreks him, sending Alex and Sal running through the school that at certain points doesn't even look like a school. It just looks like a dungeon. What is up with this horrible building? As they search the room, Nikki ends up actually hiding in there from his dad, and he is hammered. Alex looks out the window as she spots the Bugman is following them. Meanwhile, the DOD is finding slug trails all over the side of the building. Well, that's pretty nasty. Alex, Sal, and Nikki hide in the downstairs room and then shut the door. Now we get some beautiful acting from Alex. She mentions how the bugs have evolved to look like humans in a general sense. But Sal says it looks like Lou the janitor, which we get the most lackluster, no, that's not possible. They evolve in general ways. No, it's not possible. No. It was just god awful. I laughed the whole way through it. Basically, these things are jacking human faces now, hence the skulls that are being found without the face meat. So, as Klasky drives his 1964 Chevy Malibu, which we can all agree the best thing that came out of Chevrolet in the 1960s, was actually the 1967 Impala Super Sport, which came with a small block 327, but let's be real here. 396 big block, having 325 horsepower, was probably superior. Not probably, it was. That's just my 2 cents on the matter. Moving on, jerking the wheel, he avoids ending up like the taxi driver from earlier, but really should be focused on driving rather than looking at a picture. He can just pull over and do that. Meanwhile, in Bug Alley, the squad is pretty scared there. Alex says that the bugs won't hurt them because they don't need to. Right. And this is really all for Sal's benefit. Alex says that they are in the nest, and as long as they don't disturb it, they should be good. Nikki drops his lighter, and then when he was looking for it, finds that a suitcase is full of eggs and dirt. So nest officially disturbed. Also, a dude without a face is back there. Alex tells Nikki to not open that, but he does. As they go to close it, the kids are a little rambunctious inside. Way to go, Nikki. So they squish a bunch of these kids, and that'll be a problem later. Outside the school, Klasky realizes that Alex is still there. Alex says that they need to barricade themselves in. Nikki says that they should pick up a few pipes and just beat the living crap out of it. Caveman brain, FTW. But Alex says as soon as he hits that carapace, it wouldn't do any damage. Her plan is to try to blind it with the camera, but stay away from clustered areas and floor vents, as this thing is smart. Moving through the hallway, Sal is already sweating like you wouldn't believe, so this thing can easily smell them. Also, Nikki is tripping over everything possible. Alcohol is not helping their case. As she takes pictures of areas before entering, they see that so far, they're good. But then the camera dies, so there goes that plan. As they continue walking, they realize Bug Woman is checking on the babies, and I think it's Bug Woman. They do say termites were mixed in, so I can only assume maybe they use the termite structure, which means they have a king. So then all these would be females. But then later, he's gonna impale her, so he has to be a male. So yeah, he's a bug man. I think they're just using the termite structure, which means he's actually the king of the mound. I think they kind of got some wires crossed here. Anyways, breaking the barrier, they make their way through before Alex makes her not so great escape. The thing catches up pretty close, and as she tries to blind it, her camera remains dead after the final flash. As it goes to take her out, the bugman goes to do things, but Klasky ends up firing a few rounds and asking what that thing is, as it isn't a man. Yeah, no kidding, bro. Alex says it's a mixture of not just mantis and cockroaches, but also termites to spice it up. She calls the CDC to get the nerds out there, as the Department of Defense heads to their location instead. Klasky makes a makeshift tool to take the thing's head off, but it can actually survive for 9 days without its head. The issue with this concept is that only applies to cockroaches. I believe if you're a giant bug man, the energy requirements are going to be a lot higher, which we are definitely going to be dunking on that later, because the larger the brain, which these things are apparently intelligent, the more caloric intake is needed. That thing is not surviving without its head, and it's not surviving without food for 9 days. So as Alex listens to the walls, they realize the clacking is coming from inside the house, or the walls. It can smell their pheromones, but apparently it wants Alex. Again, why? She says that they need to send everyone else out, and she will hang back there. At this point, Klasky takes Sal to escape, and Alex ends up borrowing clothes from Nikki in order to cover up her scent, because apparently this is supposed to cover up her pheromones. She's literally still sweating. The phone then rings, which angers the bugman, and apparently it was the Department of Defense. They now assume that she's gone because she didn't answer the phone after one phone call. The Department of Defense sucks. Klasky is relieved of his command over the event, so he does something incredibly just amazing. He's like, aren't you gonna take my force multiplier? And they're like, oh yeah, we need to take that from you. So they take it from him, and then all he does is grab the other force multiplier from the other officer. Why didn't you just keep yours? I mean, he punches the other guy in the face, great, but I don't know, it was really dumb. Meanwhile, the Bugman thinks Nikki is challenging him for the female. The bug then impales Alex in the uterus with bugs, as Nikki then nopes out of there. Klasky goes to get a round off on the Bugman, but then it goes in to start cutting his face. He is though saved by two others from the Department of Defense before the thing ends up dragging Alex off. So the Department of Defense says screw it, and then they bring in the big old can of Raid. Alex awakens, hanging out in some goo before getting up to get out of there. She begins walking about, only to be found by Klasky and then carried out of there. Although he appears to be a little confused by mere plastic, Alex grabs a piece of glass and cuts the plastic before awakening in the hospital. Talking to the doctors, they said that they have cleared all the larvae out of her stomach area, but they ate the dead tissue, which is why her recovery went so well. However, the Department of Defense took the larva away. A team is sent in to also find the Bugman or confirm that he's gone, but oh no, they find he's already molted and it's with Lou's face. So, who could it have been? Is it Alex? Is it Sal? Is it the guy confused by plastic and stumbling around? It's a pretty uncrackable mystery, but Sal comes to visit Alex saying that his aunt drove him, but he has lots of ants in a jar. Ha 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 ha. So now Alex is talking about adoption with the kid because clearly he is on his own. Alex says, wow, you'll love the door. It's reinforced steel, 3 inches thick, but that doesn't mean much because she doesn't close the window. So the door opens and she finds a suitcase in there, meaning Bugman is already in the house. She tells Sal to stay outside, which he immediately enters. So one day into adoption, and he's already questioning your authority, commanding presence. As she approaches the suitcase, it's clear the bugs are also all over the house. Going to the phone, she realizes that her phone has been cut off because she sucks at paying bills. As she looks at the front door, she finds out that it's Klasky, just as the team finds Klasky. What a twist! She approaches the bug, which this thing looks so creepy. She grabs her giant scissors and completely takes off its head. Gross. And then we get this weird scene where the thing is like going after her with its hand. I don't want to talk about it. So after this uncomfortable fight, they say that they have to wait 9 days before that thing finally drops, which I see that they have a fire escape. It's right there. Thus concludes the ridiculous movie Mimic 2. So I'm gonna be straight up honest with you. Mimic 3 made me want to eat my own hands out of boredom because nothing really happens. No new information, no weird things they're doing, just a limping to the barn sort of scenario. So here's the quick and dirty. Guy who originally had Strickler's disease is left somewhat crippled by the effects. As such, he developed a hobby of looking out the window and taking pictures of what's happening across the street. Really creepy. Over time, his sister's boyfriend gets got, which they witness. Some girl gets interested in him. A cop dates his mother, but doesn't really believe any of them. Conflict ensues over it as he attempts to tell the police that the Mimic bugs are just taking over the apartment across the road. Eventually, it spreads to their apartment, where there's this like underground resistance type of thing against the bugs, which is formed by one guy. They manage to escape after burning it. And again, I found the third one completely unnecessary, but that's just like my 2 cents on the matter. It seems like they were really trying to go for that like Alfred Hitchcock rear window sort of thing back in like the 1950s, where you witness something across the street and you're trying to it was a it was a stupid attempt. Okay. Anyways, so moving on. So first things first, what we need to actually cover is the disease that caused New Yorkers to lose their collective and for good reason. In fact, to the point that longer term trials and studies were foregone because of how rapidly this new disease was spreading and almost seemingly going to decimate the local population of children and spread beyond that. Known as Strickler's disease, this disease's course or its pathophysiology would end up showing us ultimately what it was, which is really bad for every parent putting their head near their children while they were in these makeshift beds. The first thing we know about Strickler's disease is the most obvious. It affects the younger population detrimentally, and for a while, it was really not understood where it originated from. As the disease progressed within those infected, they would ultimately have trouble breathing. Taking in shallow, rapid breaths, this would indicate that carbon dioxide was building up in their systems as the oxygen-carbon dioxide exchange that usually happens with, doesn't usually happen, it does happen within the alveolar sacs of the lungs was compromised in some ways. For this to happen, it could be that pneumonia or fluid in the lungs was beginning to build up over time, causing the gas to no longer be exchanged. As this happened, the blood would become more acidic due to the buildup, which would be measured by the chemoreceptors in the brainstem. But it's a two-pronged issue. As the brainstem would begin to measure, it starts telling the body, okay, breathe faster, we need to get the carbon dioxide out of here, which if we were dealing with just pneumonia has a better chance of being addressed. However, it's the other effect that this disease has that is most troubling for this. To actually overcome what is happening in the lungs, the nervous system needs to be functional. However, as the doctors are talking and walking past the children, he mentions how most of them are going to drop shortly after contracting this illness. Any of them that survive will be in leg braces for the rest of their lives. Well, we saw in the extremely short summary I did in the third one, this guy is not actually any leg braces, but is frailer than what would be expected. On top of that, take my word for it, because again, short summary, he has extreme allergies to most things induced by Strickler's disease, which means the immune system is hypersensitive, which is actually quite important to figuring out what this is. Starting with the leg braces, this indicates that something is happening that is quite detrimental to the actual functioning of the nervous system. In some ways, the motor neurons have been compromised to the point that movement of the limbs becomes difficult and muscular strength has been decreased as well. This is just an after effect, however, because you actually have to survive the infection to begin with. Here's something horrible that's going to affect you for the rest of the video. While breathing is an autonomic function, meaning it happens without us realizing it, breathing can also be a manual thing as well, so you are breathing manually. However, with the acidity of the blood building up, the body would be pushing children to rapidly breathe without even the manual input required. That said, knowing that these survivors will be in leg braces, we also know this illness is affecting the nervous system pathways, one of them being motor neurons, which is responsible for the diaphragm movement, which helps us in breathing. So the big thing is that take smooth muscle, for instance, or cardiac muscle. These things happen naturally. Smooth muscle being like your intestines, they contract without you having to think about it. Cardiac muscle contracts without you having to think about it. Motor neurons actually affecting skeletal muscle, such as the diaphragm, you can think about it and you can make it happen. So this muscle weakness, which would be displayed throughout the body, does not just stop with limb muscles, but would also definitely be impacting the actual muscles required for breathing, such as the diaphragm. You do have backup muscles in the intercostal area, which are between the ribs and also in the shoulders, but these are also compromised, giving us the exaggerated rise and fall of the chest in the kids as they struggle to get enough strength to signal the chest to properly expand. The last point to figuring out what this is also the hypersensitivity of the immune system later in life. The concept of the autoimmune diseases comes to mind. As the body encounters anything foreign, it immediately goes into stage 5 freakout and throws everything it has at the invader, no matter how small or really not that much of an issue it would likely cause, such as cigarette smoke. The guy in the third movie was on immunosuppressants also to help mitigate these issues, but even then it was not too effective. The disease I have in mind would most definitely fall within this issue. But first, let's talk about what is an autoimmune disease. Auto meaning self and immune meaning basically attacking something in this scenario, and really your immune system is going to attack yourself. Now normally after maturation of the immune cell, it will go through the thymus concerning T lymphocytes. Now I'm also going to shout out Kyrgyzstan in this because A, I love them, and B, they always are on point with their scientific information. The concept of the immune system is basically that we randomly build things. As long as we are building new receptors, we can always lock on to new viruses, new bacteria, new parasites. Essentially, every outbreak known and unknown will have your body build something to counter it. Now, the issue with this is when it becomes autoimmune. Your body has basically built something that will destroy itself. So again, the ones that are randomly created to attack your body will be weeded out, which if I'm actually remembering correctly, results in the destruction of over 98% of these cells within this organ, which sounds bad, but it's actually great because that means those things aren't running around attacking your body. It's clear though that Strickler's disease causes this process to in some ways fail. As the body throws everything, including the kitchen sink at Strickler's disease, some of the autoimmune cells get around the selection process, which actually happens more than you think during infections. If anything affects the thymus, they become less effective at weeding out the autoimmune cells. So it's almost like releasing convicts to help the military deal with an alien invasion sort of deal. Problem is reclaiming those convicts later as they cause damage to society. So I lied about that being the last clue earlier. The last clue is actually how this disease spreads. In the sewer system, the bad news is it's really nasty down there. In fact, tons of bacteria, viruses, and parasites flourish in these conditions because it's warm, they have access to biodegradable material, and it's protected from the UV radiation of the giant nuclear fusion ball in the sky. So stay out of the sewers, kids, more so when you see a clown with a red balloon. But in New York, this is the perfect breeding ground for really nasty stuff, which what's worse is we see it all the time. And this is an actual thing that happens where, take for instance, different species of really dangerous bacteria will genetically exchange information through conjugation, which basically means that they will share genetic information through a giant tube from one bacterial cell entering another. But this makes them better at surviving an environment, whether that environment is inside of you or out in the open. But what's even worse is, and I'm about to go on a rant, but the antibacterial hand soap that we are using. So again, rant incoming. This crap is literally the worst thing possible that we could be using. It does nothing more than basic hand soap as a base base literally tears apart a cell membrane of a bacterial cell. But shoving antibiotics into everything is literally strengthening the bacteria in the sewers, making it harder and harder for us to use them on the surface to clear an infection. It's literally so dumb. I cannot stand it, and I can't tell you how many things I've seen become resistant because of stuff like this. So if you're hearing me, stop using antibiotic hand soap immediately unless you're in like a hospital or it's completely necessary. We are literally sprinting towards an antibiotic immune apocalypse with this crap. Companies are incredibly short-sighted. They're not your friend. They need to stop making this. All right, so I'm done there. I'm gonna get off my soapbox, my regular soapbox and not antibiotic hand soapbox. But what's down in the sewers is using roaches as a vector for this disease. And what do roaches eat? Biodegradable material that ends up in the sewer. And what are they crawling across? Getting all over their bodies? That's right, that same material. And what still exists within the world right now because we haven't managed to fully eradicate it? Well, it's no, I'm just kidding. It's actually polio. Strickler's disease presents itself exactly like the effects of polio. Nowadays, we don't really fear polio so much because of the vaccines that have been produced in response to. Even back in the day, most who have contracted it would survive with little to no issue. However, for those who had it attack their nervous systems, they would actually end up with difficulty breathing and walking, and still for others, it would result in complete paralysis of their meat suits, which in turn would cause them to stop breathing. So things like the iron lung would be required for them to survive. Seeing that polio can damage the nervous system, what about the other effects? Well, it's been seen in adults about 30 to 40 years after their polio infection that they can develop something known as post-polio syndrome. This syndrome will cause wasting of the muscle and weakness. There's currently no known way to stop it, treat it, but it rarely results in the actual expiration of the host. That said, it's lately become something understood to be a possible autoimmune disorder, where again, the body may be attacking itself after a delay. The frailty that develops in adults associated with PPS could be something likened to the guy in the third movie, and this is the same autoimmune issue causing his actual hypersensitivity to allergens. Another major linking factor to actually the polio virus is how it spreads. We know polio in a lot of ways goes to the intestines of people, where it will begin to rapidly spread through the endothelial cells of the intestines. Well, when you eat while the virus is currently spreading through your intestines, where do you think that ends up? Exactly, straight to the sewers. It goes where roaches eat and step in human leftovers. From here, they crawl out and into people's houses, leaving microparticles. A child laying on the ground or touching something or literally crawling across the ground and then putting their hands in their mouth later would result in direct infection. It all lines up perfectly, but the only thing that doesn't is the virulence of this virus. But then again, therein lies the issue. The reality is we haven't eradicated polio, more so back in the 1990s. Now, in the US, we don't have cases of polio pop up anymore, but that doesn't mean that it's not here. Sort of like we really don't have cases of bubonic plague pop up all that often, but there are absolutely squirrels in Colorado right now that have bubonic plague, or at least the fleas that cause them. So nowadays it's basically confined to Pakistan where we see actual outbreaks, but that doesn't mean, again, that it's not here. It's just exceedingly rare. The good news is polio is a pretty stable virus and it really doesn't mutate like the current turd in the punch bowl that we are dealing with right now. Because of that, vaccination efforts have been extremely effective in pushing this thing to where we only find cases again in Pakistan. But life, or the wretched excuse for life known as a virus, finds a way. In theory, the polio virus could mutate to the point that the vaccine given previously in life would no longer work, which we have seen every year with the flu. In fact, it is advised that if you're going to either Asia or Africa, even if you have had the polio vaccine, you still need to get a booster. With this in mind, I believe the Strickler's disease to be a mutated form of polio that began spreading. But because of this new mutated form, it strikes worse symptoms in the young, but adults seem to have less difficulty in dealing with it. This virulence would threaten to wipe out an entire generation if not properly dealt with. And because it was so disturbing how quickly it was spreading and the implications of what would happen if it left New York, a plan would be devised once the vector was located. Extermination of the roaches was the only choice. With very little research into the environmental impacts of this, and what's worse, only a few months of testing concerning the Judas breed, they would be released in order to combat the rising threat of disease in the New York City population. And it also seemed to work. Within 4 months, the roach population was eliminated as a result, and the transmission of the altered form of polio dropped off dramatically to the point that there were no new cases. So let's take a look at what the Judas bug actually did and how it was altered. First, the Judas bug was designed with its own form of self-destruction. It would stay alive for roughly about 120 to 180 days, with all of them succumbing to old age. They were also bred sterile to a degree, and I say to a degree because we're going to talk about some stuff later. So this was obviously less of a degree than previously imagined, and they would attack any males that did try to breed with them. They would also release a juice that would in turn ramp up the metabolic rate of the roach, which would cause it to starve to death no matter how fast it ate. Because of this, they would quickly begin dropping like flies. However, there was a fairly large fatal flaw in this whole plan: the roach DNA that they used. They seemingly chose roaches in order to have the males try to breed with them as to attract them in, but there was an issue. Look how many roaches there were in that sewer. It would appear as although the Judas Priest would absolutely slaughter any male, which you can't spell slaughter without laughter by the way, likely some males would end up just getting lucky and pull it off. And this created the issue. It's clear that even though the Judas breed was sterilized, the reality was some still were able to get knocked up by sheer chance and the number of roaches in the sewers. This company with the short lifespan, higher metabolism of the Judas breed, and now subsequently the roaches, and with their compatible roach DNA, which was a strange choice, meant that they were capable of having actual viable young. And this was actually a really dumb plan. Yes, it worked, but the issue is why would you design an animal to have the DNA that would work with the DNA that you're trying to get rid of? Why not have released something that is a natural predator to roaches and then have that just be released down there? But there were other mistakes that were made which were pretty critical and associated with the get the cure out the door mentality. In the efforts to actually create this bug, they would ultimately begin changing the DNA without realizing that they were hitting other areas of the genetic coding. Mutations would arise far more quickly than anticipated, which meant probably to a degree the DNA polymerase was affected, and this meant that their sterility factor was coded into the sequence of the body and then was subsequently broken quickly. While the Judas breed may not have actually bred with one another in the lab, especially because they were all female, the reality was this wasn't enough and enough testing was not done. Because going back to the sheer number of males in the sewer, someone got lucky with one whose sterility gene was broken by a mutation. Now, normally for adaptations to happen, it has to be passed to the next generation, and that is a combination of two surviving techniques and so on and so forth until you end up with something like humans, for instance. It was mentioned how that in 40 generations we went from apes to humans, and it's all based on passing along what works between two lines to create a new conglomeration of what works, and also breaking that because some of the conglomerations don't work at all. Genetic trading. It's a great thing, ain't it? And this is what happened to the Judas bug, but in a much greater capacity because of how quickly it reproduced. With their metabolism increasing effects on the roaches, this didn't just make them hungry, this made them do everything faster, which you might be asking, how did this happen? The liquid released would genetically affect the roaches, ramping up the metabolism as mentioned previously, but the other effect was that this made them grow faster too and get frisky faster as well. Generations would pass in days as opposed to weeks, and as they mated with the Judas bugs, mutations within the genetic coding would arise faster and faster, well beyond the rate of what was normal or to be expected. So that's why you do an actual environmental impact study before releasing an invasive new species that is compatible with what you are trying to eradicate, because obviously that can come back to bite you rather easily. So the question is, what were these mutations exactly? Well, it's clear the extra coding from roaches, mantis, and termites that these creatures would have a few more different genetic sequences to work with in order to grow in size, which may sound weird, but actually it's an interesting phenomenon observed in many animals. Take the liger, for instance. It is a combination of a lion and a tiger, yet it absolutely dwarfs both of the species that it originates from. Extra DNA is not always an indicator of size, but if applied to certain height and weight areas, it definitely can assist in the overall size of the creature. The next thing you have to take into account are the actual changes to the body made. Now, I'm all for mutations within the genetic coding itself, but disturbingly, what Dr. Tyler found were actual lungs within the Judas breed. Well, at least larger versions, which again, entomology 101, insects do not have lungs. I mentioned this before in the Starship Troopers episode when I said that these arachnids must have some form of lungs and actual like closed circulatory system, because the ones on Earth surely do not have lungs. This is why back way in the day when the oxygen content in the atmosphere was higher, insects were much larger. As the oxygen waned to where it is today, the insects shrunk as they could not properly saturate their organs in the oxygen due to their open circulatory systems. With the addition of lungs in the Judas breed, this makes me think that Dr. Susan Tyler added in some higher animal DNA, something with literal lungs, into the coding that was eventually unlocked in the Judas breed as generations passed within just a few days, leading to a closed circulatory system and utilization of the lungs themselves. This closed circulatory system also has other impacts, much like the ones it had on us. With blood circulating around the body, oxygen saturation levels easily increase as symptoms become more refined, which in turn led to greater intellect. Now, this is not to say that the Judas bug was really more intelligent than a human, but they seem to have an understanding about several higher concepts. The first is blending into a social society of primates, which we will go over actually in a moment about why this was necessary. Another understanding is hunting, such as stalking and hunting the higher primates who are actually very intelligent themselves. Concepts like windows, doors, buildings, navigations of tunnels, all that would take thought. But at the end of the day, their intellect did not surpass humanity's as of yet. The reality is the Judas bug was likely on their way to becoming as smart as humanity humanity would be, given their upright posture, their desire to blend in while hunting, and the traps that they set. Giving it a few more years, they may have actually had a fairly good chance at either surpassing humanity or making us openly enter a confrontation with the insect species, which would have come down to good old-fashioned lead-on-carapace conflict, as these things would likely quickly evolve through mutations out of the range of chemicals that we could use. But what's worse is they would likely also figure out force multipliers at some point should they come into contact with them enough times. The next thing I want to cover is how suspicious I am of Dr. Susan Tyler because of how these things evolve. Okay, so hear me out on this. First, mimicry is alive and well in species. The concept is to look like a more dangerous species than yourself in order to scare off other would-be predators. This happens all the time in things like coral snakes and their mimics, the scarlet king snake. In coloring, they are very similar, but one will drop you like nothing while the other can literally do no harm to you except maybe bite you a little bit. Some butterflies and moths evolve to have what almost appears to be owl eyes on their wings in order to scare off other birds. Alligator snapping turtles' tongues look like worms in order to attract fish. So this happens all the time. Now, it's possible the Judas breed saw humans as dangerous and as a result chose to mimic them, not because we were their predator as supposed by the doctor, because that honestly makes no sense as humanity didn't even know about them for 3 years for the most part. We knew there were bugs down there, but not that they were turning into these things. But it instead chose to look like us because we are top dog. Looking like us would not only afford them movement in human areas, but also we have no natural predators. So looking like us would be a natural way to keep predators away. Which, by the way, you ever wonder why humans in the wild are avoided? Mainly because we are incredibly loud, so anything around us is like, not messing with that. But also because apparently we look completely strange and likely horrible to other animals. We probably appear completely diseased because of the lack of hair that we have. It's great to be the dominant primate, but where my suspicion comes into play with Dr. Susan Tyler isn't so much how these creatures mimic us, but how effectively they were able to do it, how quickly they were able to do it, how intelligent they became, and the most glaring issue, how they developed lungs. I wasn't too sure as to why this was the case my first time watching, but I think old Susan here, though not confirmed, either intentionally or accidentally mixed in some human DNA. It may not have been very much in comparison with the other species that were used, but it may have been just enough to influence the pathway of the insects, because termites, roaches, nor mantis have a closed circulatory system. Humans do. The intellect displayed so quickly would indicate brain matter would become more of a priority than normally seen in any insect population. Now, some of this can be attributed to the roach learning aspect from past mistakes. Obviously, they aren't stupid, but the mimicry of the human face and posture when attempting to blend in indicates the formation inspired in the genetic coding must be there. So how might this be possible? Well, we clearly see these things aren't afraid to eat humans nor bite them, even the young. Take this with a grain of salt, but during the creation process, it's possible someone was bit, or a genetic sequence may have actually been inadvertently added in. Although I would have to say it was intentional because of the clean environment that they would be working in. All I'm saying is it's way too much of a coincidence. This intellect also continues on as the creatures continue to adapt into Mimic 2 when they quite literally begin jacking human faces in order to hide better. And this is clearly a callback to Mimic 1 where humans cover themselves in the juices of the bug to hide. Bugs now cover themselves with human skin in order to hide. If we can think in abstract ways, so can they. And as far as we know, we are one of the very few species who are able to think in this way. I believe ravens and dolphins are the big ones, and also there's a few others that can do this as well. In an effort to eradicate a disease that would actually have profound consequences on our species by destroying an entire generation, our species would create a counter in the form of a combination of insects and I believe a little bit of human DNA. But due to the faster metabolisms and the random chance of some lucky male reproducing with a Judas bug, their altered DNA would become part of the Judas bug. Over time, quasi-human traits would arise as the species became more and more successful utilizing these traits. This in turn led to an insect humanoid creature that could look and act like us just enough to allow it to hunt outliers. If not addressed, this would likely cause a full-scale conflict as organizations became aware of their spread. If not handled quickly, it's possible humanity would be handing the planet over to this new, faster breeding and more intelligent species given just a few decades, seeing as how quickly their intellect continued to climb in a short period